The drip fell every 4 seconds. Vesper knew because she had counted it for 10 years. The sound of water hitting stone had become the rhythm of her world, steadier than a heartbeat and infinitely more reliable. She had stopped hating it somewhere around year 3. Now it was just her clock. The chain at her wrist was iron-woven, old enough to smell of rust, rain, and stagnant air. She'd grown so used to its weight that the absence of it in her half-sleep felt like a warning. She sat with her back to the stone, knees drawn up, eyes open. She was always awake before the guards changed shifts. She'd learned to read the mountain's vibrations the way she once read the old wards, listening for the pitch of a dying torch or the heavy, purposeful tread of enforcer boots on the level above. But this morning the mountain echoed with something else. A low, distant impact. Not metal. Not boots. Something organic hitting stone, rolling and cascading downward. Vesper's spine straightened. She pressed her palm flat against the wall, feeling for the vibration. Deep in the rock, something had fallen down the old sacrificial drain. The Iron Peak pack treated the shaft like a myth or a garbage chute, but the ancient ward texts were clinically literal. They cast the condemned down the old throat, the runes read, sealed the top with prayer and let the stone have them. She waited. For seconds. A drop. Nothing else came from below. Then, so faint she thought it was her own breathing, she heard it. Scratching. Fingernails against ancient rock. Something at the bottom of the drain was still alive. Vesper turned toward the collapsed section of the eastern catacomb wall. For 8 months she had widened that gap a fraction of an inch at a time, working only when the mountain's acoustics masked the sound of grinding stone. It was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Her chain was 8 feet long, bolted to iron at the other end. She had exactly enough slack to reach the gap. She pressed her ear to the stone again. The scratching was faint but desperate. Exhaling slowly, Vesper reached for the loose rock she used to prop the gap open. The smell hit her first. Wolfsbane, black blood and the clean bite of outside air. Squeezing through the gap, she dropped into the lower passage. The stone here was rougher, hand-cut by whatever lived in the mountain before the Iron Peak pack claimed it. She moved without light, she didn't need it anymore. 30 feet ahead, the copper-thick scent of blood intensified. He lay at the base of the shaft, his body bent at sickening angles. The fall had rolled him face down, one arm pinned beneath his torso, the other stretched forward as if reaching for something. The reaching hand had left a dark, wet smear across the stone. Vesper stayed back. His leather armor was built for movement, lacking any Iron Peak insignia. But the shoulder piece on his exposed arm bore a mark she knew from her mother's genealogical texts. 2 overlapping circles, one broken. Shadow pack. Her throat closed. Her mother had taught her that sigil as a warning. These were people to run from. The man made a ragged choked sound. Letting him die here was the safest option. The people who threw him down would want her dead, and his own pack would want her for entirely different reasons. But as she crouched closer, she noticed the blistering burn pattern on his neck. It was a rare paralytic wolfsbane derivative. Someone had wanted him fully conscious for this execution. His jaw was locked, but his eyes were open, fixed on the middle distance as he fought to stay awake. Vesper studied the clan sigil again. The second circle is broken. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the Shadow Pack leader. Well, she breathed into the dark. The mountain certainly committed to this one. She had maybe 4 minutes before the enforcers ran their irregular secondary patrol. Tracing the poison's path in her mind, she knew it would reach his lungs in 2 hours. The paralysis would become permanent, a slow, suffocating death. But she could read the poison, which meant she knew how to burn it out. The cleansing blood rune was one of the oldest in the Lorekeeper canon. You will probably never need this, her mother had told her at age 9. But if you do, you will be glad you know it. Performing it without a binding compact meant writing a debt in flesh, payable from her own life force. She looked at his locked jaw and fighting eyes. Pulling the narrow blade she kept hidden in her boot, she drew it across her left palm. It burned, but she was used to pain. She traced the rune on the stone around him, her blood activating the ancient script. The reaction wasn't explosive. It was a quiet, deep vibration that spread from her palm into the floor and finally into him. His body arched sharply, then went flat. The burn pattern on his neck began to fade. Vesper sat back, her arm trembling. His breathing deepened as the paralysis loosened its grip on his lungs. She had just saved the Shadow Pack leader. She allowed herself 1 second to appreciate the spectacular stupidity of that decision before the air in the passage shifted. Petrichor. Ancient parchment. The scent hit the back of her throat and anchored there. She knew that combination from the deepest lorekeeper memories, past mother to daughter. The scent of recognition. Her eyes snapped to his face. His eyes were focused directly on her. He shouldn't have been able to move his eyes yet. Fine motor control was the last thing to return. Yet his gaze tracked her with an intensity that made the hairs on her arms stand up. He looked at her face, down to her bleeding palm and back up. "You'll be able to speak in about 6 minutes, she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Don't try before then. A partial shift in this passage will break your shoulders against the ceiling." His eyes didn't waver. "I know what you are," she continued, filling the silence to drown out the heavy scent in the air. "I know your sigil and your rank. The person who poisoned you wanted you to feel the fall. Given the access required, it was likely your beta." Something behind his eyes sharpened. He knew she was right. Vesper stepped back, desperately trying to ignore the scent following her. The old records called it the mate bond, a biological compact written into Leakan ancestry before the first Alpha claimed a mountain. He had read it as mythology. From above, the distant, purposeful sound of iron-tipped boots echoed through the rock. They had found her empty chain. "We have 4 minutes, she said, crossing back to him. She wedged her shoulder under his arm, practiced at moving dead weight. "You're going to have to help me." He pressed his good hand against the stone, taking a fraction of his own weight. It was exactly enough. Standing him up in the dark, she turned toward the passages only she knew. Of the 17 ways out of the lower catacomb, only one wouldn't lead them straight into an enforcer sweep. "The northern passage," Vesper whispered. 30 feet left turn, then we descend." He forced a guttural syllable through his unlocking jaw. His weight shifted against her, trying to angle them toward the main eastern passage, the most logical tactical route. "That passage has 3 enforcers on it by now," she said, not slowing. "The eastern wall amplifies sound. I know this mountain. You don't. Let me navigate." He fell silent. Then slowly his weight settled against her, surrendering the lead. He was trusting her calculation over his instinct. They moved 30 feet in the dark. Vesper counted the flagstones by texture, turning left where the Iron Peak Pack's sloppy renovations met the original ancient mountain rock. As they descended, the air grew colder, smelling of deep limestone and water. His breathing steadied, his chest expanding fully against her side. "Clan," he forced out. "Markings." "I know who you are," she said. "Walk." 3 sets of heavy, iron-tipped enforcer boots converged on the junction ahead of them. Torchlight flickered against the stone walls. Beside her, Torin tightened, a predator calculating angles. He tried to stand on his own, pushing off her shoulder. His legs held for 2 seconds before his damaged left knee buckled. He went down with a sharp, breathless hiss. Vesper didn't reach for him. She stepped directly over him, putting herself between his broken body and the approaching light. "Stay down," she breathed. She listened to the boots, timing their spacing. When she was 7 years old, her mother had taught her the mountain's architectural release words like a game. The Iron Peak Pack had built over the old Leakan infrastructure without understanding it. Vesper placed her hand flat against the wall, found the worn groove of the ward marker and whispered the activation phrase. The ceiling didn't roar. It gave a single percussive crack, followed by the deep groan of collapsing mass. The junction caved in entirely, burying the torchlight and the 3 enforcers under 6 feet of solid rock. Absolute, choking silence followed. Behind her, Torin slowly pushed himself up. He looked at the collapsed junction, then at her. "The passage ahead is clear for 40 minutes, she said, her voice dry from the dust. "Let's move." The crypt predated the stronghold by centuries. Vesper lowered Torin against the far wall and pulled her small, smuggled cache from a loose stone. Needle, gut thread, a clean cloth and dried mountain herbs. Sitting cross-legged in front of him, she examined the damage. Lacerations on both arms, a torn shoulder and a badly swollen knee. She threaded the needle by touch. "The wolfsbane is fully metabolized," she said quietly. "Your shift will return in a few hours. Your legs before that." "Mostly." His jaw was finally unlocked. When he spoke, his voice was rough and compressed. "Why?" It was a demand, not a question. Vesper pushed the needle through his skin. I don't know, she said. After 10 years of solitude, she defaulted to the truth. The silence stretched, thick with the scent of petrichor and iron. You're Beta, she said, tying off a knot. He had access to the poison in your route. He's probably been compensated with territory by now. The Iron Peak Alpha pays on delivery. You know him, Torin rasped. He kept me alive because I'm the only one who can read the wards preventing this stronghold from collapsing. When I finished translating them, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Why did you save me? He asked again. Vesper cut the thread. I haven't decided yet. The mountain herbs smelled sharp and green, covering the metallic tang of blood. She bound his knee tightly enough to give it structure. They'll be through the collapse in 2 hours, she said, putting 4 feet of distance between them. We can't go up. We have to take the sublevel route beneath the foundation. It connects to the Great Hall where the pack will be assembled. Torin absorbed this with unsettling stillness. You can open the foundation seal. I can open anything in this mountain. The Alpha is my target, he said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, commanding cadence. His pack took my lower territories 3 seasons ago. We have the same enemy. Guide me to the Great Hall and I will tear it down stone by stone. Vesper looked at the ancient ward text on the wall. She thought about her impending execution once her translations were finished. There's a condition, she said. When this is done, I am not trading one captivity for another. I leave with my freedom. My choice. My terms. He held her gaze. You have my word. It wasn't a formal Leakin vow, but it carried the weight of one. Above them, the long rolling howl of an enforcer echoed through the stone. The Alpha was awake and he was calling in the sweep. Can you stand? She asked. Torin pushed himself up the wall, managing the pain with rigid control. Good, she said. Don't touch the walls down here. And don't try to give me orders again. She thought she heard a faint huff of amusement behind her as she led him into the deep dark. The sublevel was the dark of geological time. The stone here had never been asked to admit light. Vesper moved through it by memory, trailing her fingertips along the wall to read the low-level wards. Behind her, Torin kept pace, masking his limp as best he could. Suddenly, her fingers brushed a new inscription. It was carved recently, the chisel marks still sharp. The Alpha couldn't read the old dialect, which meant this had been here before his occupation, unnoticed. She pressed her palm to it and read aloud. A binding clause. Ratified by the First Leakin Council. It concerns the Lorekeeper bloodline, and the conditions under which the line enters into formal compact with. She stopped cold. With the wolf who carries the counter-inscription in his blood. With. Torin prompted, his voice close behind her. Vesper pulled her hand away. It's administrative. Secondary clauses about territory. Stay left in the next section. There's a pressure marker. He didn't look back. The inscription had been precise. The mate bond wasn't just a biological reaction. It was a 400-year-old contractual compact written into the stone, waiting for both of them to walk down this exact passage. Vesper walked with her face forward, brutally suppressing the panic rising in her chest. You stopped mid-translation, Torin noted, stepping cleanly over the invisible marker she'd warned him about. I finished the relevant section. He didn't press her, which was somehow worse than if he had. They moved deeper. The inscriptions here were foundational records. As her fingers traced the rock, they found something small on the right wall, carved at floor level. It was her own name, written in her mother's handwriting. Torin stopped beside her, close enough that she could feel his body heat. He looked at her trembling hand, not the wall. My mother was here, Vesper said, her voice entirely flat to hide the fracture underneath it. Before the occupation. It confirms the route. She didn't tell him about the final sentence her mother had left. If you are reading this, you have already done it. Trust what you feel in the stone. He knows you. He kept walking. Torin's breathing was growing shallow. The residual wolfsbane was fighting his healing factor, burning him up from the inside. Vesper heard his damaged knee catch a second before it gave out. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. Without thinking, she crossed the space between them and shoved her shoulder under his arm to take his weight. He was burning hot. But the moment their bodies pressed together, the ambient hum of the mountain's wards shifted. The frequency spiked, resonating through the floorboards and into her teeth. The stone knew them both. She realized she was standing completely still, holding him in the dark. She pulled away so fast she nearly tripped. "The passage slopes upward from here," she said, her back to him. "Call out if you need to stop." She walked forward, terrified of the bond pulling at the edges of her mind. Behind her, Torin found the wall and resumed walking. He didn't say a word. Heavy iron boots echoed from the eastern branch. The enforcers had cleared a collapse Vesper thought was permanent. They were 90 feet away and closing. She pressed her back against the wall, Torin mirroring her. He tapped her wrist twice. "How many?" She tapped back. "Two." Desperate, Vesper pressed her palm to the rock, silently asking the mountain for a way out. It answered with a faint draft of cool air from an uncharted fault line on their left. Leaning close to Torin's ear, she whispered, "Left branch. Uncharted. It's that or we fight." "Left," he said without hesitation. They ducked into the narrow fault just as the enforcers reached the junction. Vesper counted her heartbeats in the dark. 4, 8, 16. The boots moved past them. "They'll overlap with the sweep in 20 minutes, she whispered. "The Alpha will know we're heading for the Great Hall." "He'll seal it," Torin agreed. "Your foundation seal. What does it require to open?" "Focus. Time. Both hands." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know," she said and kept walking. The draft led to a small natural hollow. From a loose stone in the wall, Vesper pulled the survival cache she'd spent 6 weeks building. Iron-woven bandages, a shift blade, a water skin, and dense travel rations. She unwrapped the rations, broke them perfectly in half, and set Torin's portion near him. Vesper ate slowly, taking tiny, calculated bites. Her body had learned over a decade of starvation to make everything last. A soft rustle made her look up. Torin had pushed half of his remaining food across the stone toward her. He didn't say anything, just stared at the wall. Vesper stared at the food. She hadn't been given a gift in 10 years. "How long?" he asked quietly, watching how carefully she held her ration. 10 years. Since the morning after the slaughter. He gave me 8 feet of chain and exactly enough food to keep me functional. Torin's jaw tightened. "You've been counting bites since the crypt." "Old habit," she said, picking up the shift blade to avoid his gaze. "Eat the rest," he said. It wasn't a command. It was something softer. She ate it. As she rewrapped his knee, the ward hum in the hollow shifted again. The closer she got to him, the louder the stone vibrated. She leaned back. The hum receded. She leaned forward. It surged. She had just proven the resonance effect of the mate bond in a 12-foot cave, with the subject watching her every move. Vesper put the water skin down. Her usually freezing hands were flushed with warmth. The stone was confirming everything she was trying to deny. Vesper. It was the first time he'd used her name. He hadn't asked for it. His intelligence network had evidently done its job long ago. She stared at the blade. "We can't go back. There's a secondary route to the foundation level. Steeper grade. I move in an hour." "I know," he said softly. She walked into the dark, feeling the invisible thread of the bond pulling tight between them. The secondary passage was brutal, forcing them into a crouch as the floor angled sharply upward. "When did you first notice something was wrong with your beta?" she asked, needing the distraction. Torin paused. "A season and a half ago. The Iron Peak team hit a decoy patrol route perfectly. Only leadership knew about it. But I didn't act. His father was my father's beta. I saw what I expected to see." "I did the same with the Alpha," Vesper admitted, the confession slipping out. "He visited my family's archive before the slaughter. I served him tea. I thought he respected our traditions. He was just cataloging what he wanted to steal." She swallowed hard. "The performance is the warning if you know what to look for." "So do I," Torin said, the weight of his gaze resting heavily on her. Above them the sweep compressed. Multiple heavy boots thundered from the wrong direction. The Alpha was closing the net. "We go now," Vesper said. Torin was already on his feet. Vesper ran. The passage widened into the foundation level, the ward density pressing down on her skull like a physical weight. She stopped dead. On the wall to her right was a fresh ward, carved within the last year. She pressed her palm to it and a sickening cold shot up her arm. Torin halted behind her. What is it? He added this after I was taken. Her voice was devoid of emotion. If I speak an unbinding sequence without his consent, the ward reverses the energy back into me. It's lethal. Torin's eyes darkened. You'll die. I have to carve a counter-inscription into my own skin to redirect the reversal into the stone, she said, pulling her blade. I have about 4 minutes before they find us. How long have you known this would kill you? Since I touched the wall. She walked to a small stone shelf. She didn't let herself think about the math. Sitting on the ledge, Vesper pressed the blade into her left forearm, directly over the scar from the blood rune she'd used to save Torin. The first cut burned. The second was worse. Torin stepped up to the shelf and sat beside her. Without a word, he wrapped his hands around her arm, one above the elbow, one at the wrist. His grip was immovable, grounding her against the pain and the surging hum of the mountain. What does it do? He asked, his voice a low rumble between them. It redirects the fatal energy into the foundation stone, she gritted out, carving the 5th mark. And if it isn't precise enough? Then it isn't. His hands tightened fractionally. He carved the final compound stroke. The moment the blood welled, the circuit completed. The new cuts linked with the old scar, glowing faintly. Above them, the deafening crack of a ward seal activating echoed through the ceiling. The Alpha had locked down the great hall. Now, Vesper said. Vesper squeezed through the tight subpassage and stepped into the foundation void. It wasn't a room. It was a massive circular cavern hollowed out of the mountain's core. In the center of the floor glowed the 12-foot foundation seal. The Alpha had corrupted 41 sequences. The final 2 glowed pristine blue-white on the far edge. I have a 4-second window when I speak the unbinding, Vesper told Torin rapidly. If the counter-inscription fails, finish the job. Bleed on the seal. It will void his claim. It's going to work, Torin stated, immovable. Stay back from the boundary. The field will read you as a second party and complicate the magic. She dropped to her knees at the edge of the seal, pressing both palms against the uncorrupted runes. Above them, through 60 feet of stone, she could hear the Alpha holding court. She drew a deep breath. Vesper popped the hidden access seam and rose directly onto the floor of the great hall. Torin stepped up beside her. 50 wolves stood in formal ranked formation. When they realized a chained prisoner and a presumed dead rival leader had just emerged from the floor, a collective primal rumble of confusion rippled through the room. On the dais, the Iron Peak Alpha looked up. He didn't look angry, he looked amused. He began a slow, mocking clap. The lore keeper, he purred, stepping down. And you brought him back. Very convenient. 20 feet of hostile wolves stood between Vesper and the capstone of the foundation seal in the center of the room. He didn't hesitate. She walked forward. The wolves parted, too stunned to stop her. Vesper dropped to her knees in the center of the hall and slammed her bleeding palms onto the stone. The moment she spoke the first word, the seal flared to life beneath her. But the Alpha had planned for this. 6 wolves broke formation, lunging not at Vesper but at Torin. 2 enforcers joined them. Vesper heard the sickening crunch of impact as Torin absorbed the hit of 8 men, fighting to buy her time. The Alpha strolled to the edge of the seal's boundary. Impressive, the Alpha smiled. I wondered if you'd finally stop stalling. The delays, the fabricated errors. You're very patient. Behind Vesper, the sound of silver-threaded chains rattling broke through the fight. They had bound Torin. He had stopped fighting. Your route through the sublevel, the Alpha continued. Your beta came to me 3 days ago. He told me exactly how you'd arrive. Vesper kept her eyes on the glowing stone. The Alpha crouched to her level. I've studied Lorekeeper blood magic, he said, eyeing the bloody bandage on her arm. The cleansing rune you used to save him in the shaft. You know what it cost? An unbound cleansing transfers your own life reserve to the subject. He smiled, a cold, clinical expression. You've been running on empty since you found him. And now you're trying to power a massive unbinding sequence. You came here to die. The hall fell dead silent. Behind her, Torin let out a ragged breath, the sound of a man realizing the horrifying math she had hidden from him. Yes, Vesper said. Just the flat truth. The Alpha blinked, clearly expecting begging or denial. But Vesper had done the arithmetic. She had exactly enough life force left to speak the words. She pressed her hands harder against the stone and began to read the second sequence. You understand what happens next, the Alpha said, standing tall. You speak the sequence. The ward reverses into you. That sloppy counter-inscription on your arm won't save you. Vesper looked at the cool blue light spreading from her palms. She thought of her burned archive. The displaced families. 10 years of surviving on crumbs and counting drips in the dark. Suddenly, something light and untethered broke loose in her chest. She laughed. It wasn't a tactical laugh. It was a genuine, involuntary burst of disbelief at the absolute absurdity of this man's arrogance. The Alpha froze. The entire room of predators stared at the chained, dying woman laughing on their floor. You kept me for 10 years, she smiled, her voice stripped of its usual armor. You gave me 8 feet of chain and counted my calories. But in all your meticulous cataloging, you never once asked what I was building. She slammed her palms down. I was building this. The original builder's runes began to overwrite the Alpha's corrupted sequences, burning away his claim. Behind her she heard the catastrophic screech of silver chain shattering. Torin was on his feet. The Alpha raised his hand to signal his men. Vesper took a breath and began the final unbinding. Torin didn't sprint. He walked with terrifying, deliberate purpose toward the seal. Vesper had told him to stay back. He ignored her. He dropped to both knees directly at the boundary line as close as the magic allowed. The ward hum spiked violently as the stone registered his proximity. I'm here, Torin whispered. Vesper's hands started to shake. Not from magical depletion, but from the realization that she was no longer doing this alone. She pushed through the exhaustion, speaking the ancient words as the wolves descended on Torin again. The first word hit the hall like a physical shockwave. Blue-white light flooded the floor channels. The second word made the mountain tremble. With the third word, the cuts on Vesper's arm ignited. But the magic didn't just redirect into the floor. It found Torin's blood at the edge of the seal. The circuit expanded, leaking the two of them in the ancient stone. Fourth word. The Alpha's protective wards fractured with the sound of breaking glass. Fifth word. The pack bond the Alpha had artificially enforced upon his wolves shattered. The hall went terrifyingly quiet as 50 wolves suddenly realized they were free. Sixth word. The lethal reversal ward fired, rushing up Vesper's arms. It hit her counter-inscription, surged through the mate bond circuit, and discharged harmlessly into the bedrock. She spoke the seventh and final word. The Iron Peak Alpha's 10-year empire dissolved into dust. The original leak in magic blazed to life, purifying the great hall in blinding light. Vesper was running on fumes, her life force entirely spent. She waited to collapse. Instead, large, warm, bleeding hands covered hers. Torin pressed his palms over hers, his blood mixing with hers on the ancient stone. The seal blazed a warm, golden color. The mate bond, acknowledged in blood and stone, discharged into the foundation. The mountain witnessed them both. Vesper felt the life force she had spent rush back into her body through Torin's hands. The dat was balancing. She let out a ragged, shaking breath. Around them, the 50 wolves watched as the stone validated the true heirs. The Alpha stared at the glowing floor, completely uncomprehending. His stolen power was gone. The mountain has recorded its new claim, Vesper said. Your pack bond is dissolved. The stone won't answer you anymore. The Alpha opened his mouth and issued a command. Nobody moved. The enforced loyalty was gone, leaving only cold, blank stares from the wolves he had abused for a decade. He shouted it louder. Still nothing. His tactical mind spun out, unable to process a world where he wasn't in control. Vesper didn't feel vindicated, she just felt exhausted. Torin lifted his hands from hers and stood up to his full height. Vesper looked at the Alpha one last time. The mountain refused you. The Alpha lunged. Vesper didn't turn around. She kept her hands on the seal to finish writing the final records into the stone. Behind her the fight was brief. Torin was no longer bound by wolfsbane or chains, and he fought with the brutal finality of a shadow pack leader. A heavy body hit the stone. It didn't get back up. Torin's boots crossed the floor. He walked lighter now, his damaged knee healed by the magic surging through their bond. A low, ancient sound began at the edges of the hall. One wolf bared his throat to the stone. Then another. Within seconds, all 50 wolves were kneeling, offering true unforced submission to the victors. Vesper stood up. Torin was there, offering his hand without demanding she take it. She took it anyway, letting him steady her. "We have a lot of work to do," she said. The hall waited, breathing a collective sigh of relief. Vesper was standing on open ground for the first time in 10 years. Torin stepped past her, turning to face her in the center of the room. He was covered in blood, his armor in ruins, but his eyes were clear. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy iron disc, the Shadow Pack witness token. He dropped to one knee. The silent hall somehow grew quieter. He bowed his head, holding the token up to her. "Vesper. Last of the Lorekeeper line. Heir to the Mountains record. This stronghold and its territories are claimed in your name. Witnessed by me." Vesper stared at his bowed head. She thought about her mother's final message. "If you are reading this, you have already done it." She reached out and took the warm iron token. "Get up," she said softly. "We have a lot of work to do." Vesper asked the wolves for a fine-tipped chisel and water. They brought them instantly. She sat cross-legged at the edge of the seal, in the blank space reserved for the architect's testimony. With steady hands she carved the true history of the mountain into the rock. The Alpha's slaughter. The Shadow Pack's lost families. The decade of captivity. Torin sat down beside her, entirely comfortable in the silence. "What does it say?" he asked quietly. "The truth. All of it. Including us?" Vesper stopped chiseling. She looked at the fresh runes documenting their combined bloodlines. "Including us," she said, and went back to carving. She finished as the torches burned low. The wolves had already begun organizing, starting a fire in the pit and checking the ruined doors. They were building a home instead of guarding a prison. Vesper brushed the stone dust from her warm hands. Torin was still sitting beside her, mere inches away. She shifted, letting her shoulder rest against his arm. Torin froze, as if afraid that moving would break the moment. "My mother left me 7 sentences on the wall downstairs," Vesper murmured, watching the fire. 6 were instructions. The 7th said, "If you are reading this, you have already done it." She swallowed hard. "I didn't let myself believe it. I spent 10 years not letting myself." "I know," Torin said, his voice a steady anchor. Vesper leaned fully into his side, finally letting her guard drop. He didn't move away. He stayed. Dawn broke over the mountains, washing the high stone in pale gold light. Vesper stood at the eastern window, looking out over her family's reclaimed territory. Torin stood beside her in the quiet morning air. "The lower territories will need documentation," Vesper said. "The border markers need reinscription. It's months of work." "We'll go when you're ready," Torin replied. She didn't push the word away. He could leave the mountain right now. She was free. But as she watched the sunlight hit the snowpack, she realized she actually wanted to stay. The work was here. The people were here. He was here. She turned from the window, meeting Torin's gaze. "The hall's upper wards need to be checked before tonight," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I'll need a different chisel." "I'll find one," he promised. Vesper walked back toward the glowing seal, placing her hands on the warm stone to begin again.